You know the image: black uniforms, skull badges, unwavering loyalty to the Führer, Hitler's personal bodyguards, the men who stood closest to absolute power. But what happened when that power crumbled? When the bunker doors slammed shut and the Reich burned? These weren't just soldiers following orders. These were the inner circle, the true believers who knew every secret, witnessed every decision. Their fate was in exile or prison camps. It was something far more final. If you value documented historical research like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from testimonies of the Nuremberg trials and Soviet military archives. Now back to the story. The Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler. Formed in 1933, 117 men hand-picked from across Germany. Not just bodyguards, political soldiers. They swore a blood oath not to the state, not to Germany, but to one man. Heinrich Himmler called them the most dangerous men in Europe. By 1945, that danger had turned inward. Joseph Dietrich commanded them from the start. A former tank sergeant who caught Hitler's eye in Munich, Dietrich built the unit from a ceremonial guard into a full combat division. 30,000 men by war's end. But the core remained. Those original bodyguards who knew where Hitler slept, what he ate, who visited the bunker at 3 a.m. The recruitment was personal. Hitler interviewed each candidate himself. Height minimum 6 feet. Perfect physical condition. Unmarried? No criminal record. Most importantly, fanatical loyalty proven through years in the Nazi Party. They lived in barracks next to Hitler's residence, a thé at his table, listened to his private conversations about conquest and extermination. Bruno Gesche, bodyguard, since 1934. Present at the Berghof when Hitler planned the invasion of Poland. Present in the bunker when Soviet shells shook the concrete overhead. Gesche had heard Hitler's private rants about the final solution. He knew the locations of mass graves across Poland. On April the 29th, 1945, Gesche received his final order. Burn the Reich Chancellery documents, destroy the communications equipment, prepare for the end. The Soviets had a different plan. Stalin's directive was clear. These men had protected the architect of 27 million Soviet deaths. There would be no prisoner exchanges, no war crimes trials. SMERSH units, Soviet military counterintelligence, had their names, their photographs, their last known positions. Special hunting teams formed specifically to capture Hitler's inner circle. The priority list had 47 names. 31 were bodyguards. The hunt began before Hitler pulled the trigger. Soviet forces had infiltrated Berlin by April 20th. Street fighting reached the government district on April 27th. The bodyguards organized the final defense perimeter around the Reich Chancellery. 12 men with machine guns and Panzerfausts against 300,000 Soviet troops. The mathematics were simple. Survival was not the objective. Rokas Misch, Hitler's telephone operator and bodyguard for 8 years. He heard every conversation, knew every code word. Misch controlled communications between the bunker and the outside world. He connected Hitler's calls to Heinrich Himmler, Joseph Goebbels, and military commanders across the collapsing front lines. Every conversation was logged, every caller identified. On May 2nd, Misch tried to break out of the bunker complex with the final group. 17 men in civilian clothes, carrying forged papers. They split into 3 teams. Misch's team made it 6 blocks from the Reich Chancellery before Soviet patrols spotted them. Machine gun fire killed 4 men instantly. The survivors surrendered. Soviet records, declassified in 1991, show Misch died in custody 3 days later. The interrogation focused on Hitler's final communications. Who called the bunker in the last week? What were Hitler's final orders to commanders in the field? Where were the radio codes hidden? Misch knew all of it. The interrogation lasted 14 hours, then silence. Cause of death listed as interrogation complications. His body was never returned to his family. Wilhelm Mohnke, SS Brigade commander who led the final bunker defense. Mohnke had been with Hitler since the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923, 22 years of absolute loyalty. He knew the location of hidden Nazi gold reserves worth $15 million. The names of Nazi sympathizers in neutral countries, the escape routes planned for other high-ranking officials. Mohnke organized the final breakout from the bunker. 400 people, SS officers, government officials, bodyguards, secretaries. The plan was to reach the American line 60 miles west, move at night, avoid Soviet patrols, split into small groups if discovered. The breakout failed within hours. Soviet forces had surrounded the government district with 3 complete divisions, searchlights every 50 meters, machine gun nests covering every street, radio interceptors tracking any communication attempts. Only 12 people from the original 400 reached American lines. Mohnke was not among them. Captured May 8th near the Brandenburg Gate. Soviet intelligence files record his arrival at Lubyanka prison in Moscow on May 12th. The transfer took 4 days, unusual for such a high-value prisoner. The delay suggests intensive field interrogation before transport. Final entry in Munka's file dated May 15th, 1945. 1 week in Moscow's most secure prison. Then his file goes blank for 40 years. When the file reopens in 1985, it contains a single page. Subject deceased. Date of death, May 16 Uvers 1945. Location classified. No further details. The pattern was systematic. Kill the witnesses. Silence the secrets. Karl Döring, Hitler's personal valet and bodyguard since 1937. Döring dressed Hitler every morning, helped him with his boots, served his vegetarian meals, heard Hitler's private conversations with Eva Braun about suicide pacts and cyanide capsules. Döring knew Hitler's daily routine, his health problems, his private fears about losing the war, captured attempting to reach American lines on May 9th. American forces held Döring for 6 days, then handed him over to Soviet forces under the Yalta prisoner exchange agreements. The Americans kept detailed records. Döring was healthy when transferred. He spoke fluent English. He offered information about Nazi gold hidden in Swiss banks in exchange for asylum. The Americans passed his offer to Soviet commanders. The response was immediate. Transfer the prisoner immediately. No negotiations. No delays. Last seen at a transit camp near Berlin on May 23rd. Soviet camp records show Döring's arrival. They also show his cell assignment, Block 7, Cell 14, the same block used for high-value political prisoners. No further records exist. Block 7 was demolished in 1946. All prisoner records were ordered destroyed, but some survived in unexpected places. Franz Schädler, bodyguard, who accompanied Hitler to the Wolf's Lair bunker in East Prussia. Schädler was present during the July 20th assassination attempt in 1944. He helped evacuate Hitler after the bomb exploded. He knew the names of every conspirator, every detail of the investigation, every execution that followed. Captured with forged papers trying to cross into Switzerland on June 1st, 1945. The papers were excellent, created by the same forgers who made escape documents for other Nazi officials. Swiss border guards almost let him through. A routine check revealed discrepancies in the travel stamps. Swiss authorities returned him to Soviet control on June 4th. The Swiss kept detailed records of prisoner transfers, legal requirements under international law. Schädel was transferred to a camp in the Urals, camp number 47. The camp housed 2,000 political prisoners, former government officials, military officers, intelligence agents. Soviet records show the camp operated until 1947, then it was shut down. All prisoner records were ordered destroyed. All former prisoners were transferred to other facilities or released. The camp was dismantled. The site was abandoned. But local records in the nearby town tell a different story. Mass graves were discovered during construction in 1968. Human remains from approximately 1,500 bodies. The graves dated to 1947, the same year the camp closed. None of the bodies were identified. All were reburied in unmarked graves. The systematic elimination extended beyond the bodyguards themselves. Hermann Fegelein wasn't technically a bodyguard. He was Hitler's brother-in-law, married to Eva Braun's sister Gretel, but he lived in the inner circle, attended private meetings, knew the deepest secrets. Fegelein had access to Nazi Party financial records. He knew about gold shipments to Swiss banks. He knew about escape funds hidden across Europe. On April 27th, Hitler discovered Fegelein had been secretly negotiating surrender terms with Allied forces through Swedish intermediaries. The betrayal was personal. Eva Braun begged for her brother-in-law's life. Hitler refused. The execution was immediate. Shot in the Reich Chancellery courtyard by men who had served beside him for years. Kurt Hummel and Franz Schädel pulled the triggers. Both men were dead within 72 hours. Captured during the final breakout. No coincidence. The bodyguards who carried out Hitler's final execution orders faced their own reckoning immediately afterward. Not all of Hitler's bodyguards died in Soviet custody. Geography determined survival more than loyalty. The 4 bodyguards captured by Western Allied forces lived to see freedom. The contrast was stark. American and British forces followed international law, Geneva Conventions, prisoner rights, war crimes trials with legal representation. Sepp Dietrich, the original Leibstandarte commander, was captured by American forces in Austria on May 8th. War crimes trial in Dachau began November 19th, 1945. Dietrich was charged with ordering the execution of American prisoners at Malmedy. 129 witnesses testified. Documentary evidence filled 3,000 pages. Dietrich was sentenced to 25 years. He served 10 years in Landsberg prison, the same prison where Hitler wrote Mein Kampf 20 years earlier. Released in October 1955. Died peacefully in his bed in 1966. The difference was crucial. Dietrich had been transferred to command regular SS combat units in 1943. He wasn't in the bunker during the final months. He didn't know the financial secrets. He couldn't identify escape networks. He had military value, not intelligence value. The inner circle faced a different calculation entirely. If you value documented historical research like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. Now back to the story. Stalin's intelligence services understood the precise value of what these men knew. Swiss bank accounts holding Nazi gold worth $50 million, rat lines for escaping war criminals leading to South America, the locations of mass graves across Eastern Europe containing evidence of war crimes, intelligence networks that could be turned or eliminated. The interrogations were systematic and thorough. Erich Kempka, Hitler's personal driver and transport officer since 1932, spent 5 years in Soviet custody. Unlike the bodyguards, Kempka survived. His survival revealed the selection criteria. Kempka drove Hitler to meetings and events, but he wasn't present during private conversations. He knew routes and schedules, not state secrets. Kempka's memoir, Postwar, published in 1975, describes the interrogation process. 18-hour sessions in windowless cells, sleep deprivation for days at a time. The same questions repeated for months. Soviet interrogators had recovered documents from the Reich Chancellery, financial records, communication logs, travel schedules. If they wanted to know about the money, Kempka wrote, every transaction, every payment, every account number. They had ledgers from the Reich Chancellery showing Hitler's personal expenses. They knew when Hitler bought Eva's jewelry, when he paid for construction at the Berghof, when he transferred funds to Swiss banks. They wanted the bodyguards to confirm the financial networks and identify the account holders. The bodyguards, who couldn't provide that information, became expendable immediately. Johannes Henschel, bunker mechanic who maintained the electrical and ventilation systems, technically not a bodyguard, but part of the inner staff who lived in the bunker complex. Henschel repaired generators, fixed heating systems, maintained the air filtration equipment, essential work, but purely technical. The Soviets released Henschel in 1953 after 8 years in prison camps. His mechanical knowledge had no intelligence value. He couldn't identify bank accounts or escape routes. He knew how to fix generators, nothing more. Upon release, Henschel worked as an electrician in East Germany until his death in 1982. The pattern was clear throughout the Soviet system. Technical knowledge meant survival, intelligence knowledge meant death, but the most chilling fate belonged to those who tried to run. Gerhard Bolt, Hitler's adjutant and military liaison tout, escaped the bunker during the final breakout attempt on May 1st, made it 300 miles west through Soviet-occupied territory before capture near the Elbe River. American forces initially held him as a prisoner of war. Bolt was carrying detailed maps of German fortifications across Eastern Europe, defense positions, supply depots, communication centers, maps that Stalin's forces could use for their own military expansion into Western Europe. Under the Yalta agreements, American forces transferred Bolt to Soviet custody on May 20th. Bolt died in transport to Moscow. The official report lists mechanical failure as the cause. The train derailed 50 miles outside Berlin. Only one car was damaged, the prisoner transport car carrying Bolt and 3 other high-ranking Nazi officials. All 4 men died in the crash. The rest of the train was undamaged. Soviet railway records, discovered in 1992, tell a different story. The derailment was deliberate. Explosives were placed on the track. The timing was precise. Detonation occurred exactly when the prisoner car passed over the charges. The other cars continued to Moscow with their cargo of captured German military equipment. Some escapes succeeded. But the price was everything they had known. Otto Günsche, Hitler's personal adjutant and bodyguard for 6 years, present when Hitler shot himself on April 30th, present when Eva Braun took cyanide. Günsche received Hitler's final order: burn the bodies in the Chancellery Garden. Leave no trace, no martyrdom, no shrine. Günsche poured 20 gallons of gasoline over the bodies, struck the match, watched the flames consume the man he had served without question for 6 years. Soviet artillery shells were falling 200 meters away. The garden was under sniper fire. Günsche stood guard over the funeral pyre for 3 hours until only ash remained. Soviet forces captured Günsche during the breakout attempt on May 2nd. 12 years in prison camps across Siberia. Labor camps in temperatures reaching minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Logging, mining, construction. Survival rate in the camps was 30%. Günsche survived. Released in 1957. Returned to West Germany weighing 90 pounds less than when captured. He never spoke publicly about his time as Hitler's bodyguard. Never gave interviews to historians or journalists. Never wrote memoirs. Never appeared in documentaries. He worked as a construction foreman in Düsseldorf until his death in 2003. The silence was absolute survival strategy. The psychological impact on survivors was documented by American military psychiatrists. post-traumatic stress, survivor guilt, complete inability to discuss their experiences. Several survivors required psychiatric treatment. Others turned to alcohol. The knowledge they carried was a burden that never lifted, but the broader implications were strategic, not personal. The final accounting came decades later when Soviet archives opened after the Cold War. The documents revealed the true extent of the systematic execution program. Of the 43 men who served as Hitler's personal bodyguards during the war's final year, 31 were captured by Soviet forces. 27 died in custody within 6 months of capture. The official causes varied: interrogation complications, transport accidents, camp diseases, attempted escapes, suicides. None of the deaths were investigated. None of the bodies were returned to families. All death certificates were classified for 50 years. The 4 bodyguards captured by Western Allied forces received dramatically different treatment. All survived the war. All served prison sentences of less than 15 years. All were released during the 1950s amnesty programs. All lived to old age in post-war Germany. The difference wasn't their crimes. Every bodyguard had participated in the same system, followed the same orders, sworn the same oaths. The difference was their knowledge and who wanted that knowledge extracted or silenced. Soviet intelligence recovered an estimated $12 million in Nazi gold from Swiss accounts using information extracted from captured bodyguards. The gold was melted down and integrated into Soviet currency reserves. The bank accounts were closed. The paper trail disappeared. But the most revealing detail came from an unexpected source decades later. In 2007, construction workers renovating a government building in Moscow found a sealed room in the basement. Inside were filing cabinets from the NKVD, Stalin's secret police. The room had been walled up during the Khrushchev era and forgotten. Among the thousands of documents was a complete roster of Hitler's personal staff, cross-referenced with intelligence assessments. Next to each bodyguard's name was a handwritten note in Russian indicating the estimated intelligence value, financial information, military secrets, political connections, escape networks. Each assessment included a numerical score from 1 to 10. The bodyguards who died in custody all had scores of 8 or higher. All had the same notation in red ink: information extracted, subject expendable, disposal authorized. The men who survived had scores of 3 or lower, technical knowledge only, no strategic intelligence value. At the bottom of the roster was a summary page signed by Lavrentiy Beria, Stalin's intelligence chief. The summary outlined the systematic elimination of witnesses who could reveal Soviet interrogation methods or financial seizures from Nazi accounts. The program was codenamed Operation Silence. 27 men eliminated, $12 million recovered. No international incidents, no diplomatic complications. The operation was deemed a complete success. The men who swore to die for Hitler got their wish. Just not the way they imagined. They expected to die in battle, defending the Reich to the last bullet. Instead, they died in basement interrogation rooms, their secrets extracted with surgical precision before their elimination. Cold numbers in a Moscow basement. The final verdict on absolute loyalty.